We are back. Sam Seder, Emma Vigeland on the Majority Report. Joining us now, Nick Weiner, Senior Campaign Lead for the Committee for Better Banks at the Communication Workers of America. Nick, thanks for joining us. You are helping Wells Fargo workers unionize. Let's just, I guess, start at the beginning. Like, how did the Communication Workers of America get involved, or is it, with this effort?
Sure. Thanks for having me. So CWA started an effort a number of years ago, along with, at the urging of some bank unions around the world, because actually bank workers in other countries, in Europe and Brazil, Japan, are already heavily unionized and form unions. And the standards in the United States in the industry was dragging everyone else down. So they came to CWA, and because CWA has in the telecommunications industry, has a lot of workers in call centers, there was a good fit to say, hey, let's see if we can raise the standards and working conditions for bank workers across the board. And it was in the last couple of years where things have really started to take off, with Wells Fargo workers wanting to not just raise the alarm about like the fake account scandal a few years ago. The Committee for Better Banks helped workers at Wells Fargo to speak out because there was such unbelievable stress and pressure on them. But now they're turning the corner and say, you know what, enough is enough. We want to organize a union. We're not giving these CEOs another chance.
And part of the stress and pressure that was placed on them was basically a public blaming by the CEO of Wells Fargo, I believe, a few years ago, for some of these mid-level managers and people working at Wells Fargo for the signing up people for all these fake accounts, as opposed to turning the blame upwards. I mean, how did that kind of affect how the workers felt about their employer in this instance?
Oh, it's unbelievable. Like, the first action Wells Fargo took, I think, was to fire 5,000 frontline workers, bankers and tellers, and say, oh, see, it was these bad apples. We got rid of them. Problem solved. But really, it was rotten at its core, the whole culture. They had this mantra of 8 is great, that you had to sell 8 products to each customer that came in the door, or you were reprimanded and, your job was on the line. So that, just went on for years. Just imagine if bank regulators had actually talked to bank workers directly, this wouldn't have metastasized for so long. So, workers seem like, hey, if something goes wrong, we're the scapegoats. And they try to then put a smiling face and lipstick, to tell regulators, hey, problem solved, everything's good. And I still get, there's all these Wells Fargo alums who left, quit, got fired 6 years ago. They're still involved with the Committee for Better Banks because of like the trauma from that experience, and are encouraging current workers to organize, like, cheering them on because of what they went through and how they were blamed and retaliated against, over the years.
I want to come back to some of that. I mean, I love the concept of 5,000 bad apples. They just all, it's like, at that point you start to look at the tree, maybe is the issue. But I was just struck by and I think this is important to emphasize, like, the idea that international unions were looking at the U.S. as bringing down standards. Like, will you talk about that dynamic? Because I don't think that dynamic gets enough attention. I think there's this perception that, like, Japan treats their bankers one way, we treat our bankers, bank staff another way. Like, but that it doesn't work that way, does it?
Well, we know our global economy is so interconnected, and obviously banking and these giant banks operate around the globe. So the kind of competition and impacts on how workers are treated, what happens in one country impacts another. We were able to invite some bank workers, from a large French bank a few years ago to our CWA convention to meet with U.S. bank workers, and there were some Wells Fargo workers, some from other banks. And the shock that the European bank workers, who have had a union as long as they could remember, on how bank workers in the United States were treated. And, working at a bank is stressful at all levels, from, Wall Street, but down to the tellers and everything in between. And we can get into that. It's just stressful handling your, finances. Bank workers want to help customers meet their financial needs. So when you have this added pressure and your job is on the line and you feel like you're going to get blamed if something goes wrong, it's just enormous stress. So the European workers came here and they were just like, oh my God, we've got to do something to help you.
And we should say that, I would imagine too, if the operating costs for a bank in Japan are higher because they actually provide for their workers better, they're at a competitive disadvantage with an American bank, and that creates pressure on that Japanese bank to lessen benefits, I guess, for their workers, perhaps. Yes or no?
Well, what I've learned is the banking sector is unbelievably profitable. And just to give you a sense, Wells Fargo, right, has paid billions of dollars in fines for, breaking a whole number of laws, banking regulations, and scandals. They still then do stock buybacks for billions of dollars, and they still have billions of dollars in profits. And under political pressure over the last few years, because workers have been speaking out, like the minimum wage at the major banks, a few years ago were down at like 10, 11, 12 bucks an hour. Now they're $15 to $20 an hour because they've been under such scrutiny. So they've been able to do all of that, right, and still run a profit. So yes, there are competition and competitive advantages, but it's such on the margin to treat your tellers and your bankers and community service representatives and fraud analysts and, mortgage processor. The list goes on of all the different obscure job titles within a giant bank. If they can treat them well and still, make a hefty profit and compete with the banks in Japan.
I'm sure. All right. So let's talk about, there are 250,000 employees at Wells Fargo. How many of them are eligible to be in a union? Are there going to be multiple unions, or is it going to just cover everyone who works at the bank who are not management, I guess? And we should remind people that managers are not allowed to unionize because of the National Labor Act of 1935. How many of those 250,000 are eligible? Will it be in one union, or is that the hope, or what?
It's a great question. And the short answer, it's a work in progress. We're figuring it out. But how we've set up the Committee for Better Banks, it's open to all bank workers, and all bank workers within a bank. So a place like Wells Fargo, we welcome all non-management workers in the bank, and sort of figuring out what the bargaining units and how to break through and gain recognition for workers that are organizing. We're still figuring out. There's a lot of exciting examples that Wells Fargo workers in branches are looking to, and seeing Starbucks workers having elections and winning store by store and saying, hey, why can't we have an election for our branch and build momentum that way? There are folks on different teams within office buildings and call centers that are, working to figure out how can we, can we organize our call center, our department, and build that way. But they're connected across the bank, so that we're building a community and a platform. So we have a national organizing committee that spans geography and job title and classification. And so that's what's really exciting, and get to help connect, a senior compliance officer in St. Louis with someone in a call center who, one who does remittance in Lubbock, Texas. And to build that kind of connections and unity so that we've got a foundation to build from so that we can figure out how to have that breakthrough and keep building. We know we can't stop at like one or two branches. We've got to, keep organizing.
So is Wells Fargo, was Wells Fargo being the first bank to, workers in a bank to attempt this, a function of things that are unique to Wells Fargo, or is it the first big attempt because there's this other element where, and just, we've mentioned it, but just to reiterate, Wells Fargo had scandal after scandal after scandal, both frankly in the run up to the financial crisis because on the mortgage side, but in the commercial banking side, like sort of unprecedented numbers of people. You come in as a customer and you get a savings account or maybe a checking account, and people were basically opened up accounts in their name. Bank workers opened up accounts in their name for other products. Maybe it's a CD, or maybe it's like or we're bumped up to like the supreme level of checking or whatever it was, because of essentially these quotas that were coming from the management. And this is the type of pressure that we're talking about. And there was no way. I know a lot of these workers attempted to sort of like say like, hey, there's a problem going on here. There was no recourse for them in a way that their job was protected to essentially blow the whistle on this stuff. And this is one of the selling points of the union outside of the bank. It's like you need empowered workers to curb the excesses of these bank CEOs and management who are looking or saying like, you need to open up 8 accounts, even though most banks have like 3 accounts per customer. Is that why this is happening at Wells Fargo? Because there's that sort of added element of a need for, like an obvious need for protecting workers with, just their ability to do their job in an ethical way?
Well, I think, here's the dirty little secret is that all the big banks do similar things, that Wells Fargo has done. Just over the last few weeks, U.S. Bank and TD Bank and some other banks have been penalized by the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and other bank regulators for having similar problems with pressuring workers that resulted in fake accounts. So it's kind of systemic in the banking industry, partly because workers don't have a voice across the board. Why Wells Fargo? I think it's because, right, they were the first and most extreme example, and workers have been trying to speak out for 6 years now, gone through 4 CEOs in 6 years, and have been giving them a chance over and over again. And just as enough is enough. So there are workers at other banks that want to organize, but it's kind of who's first and builds momentum. Then other folks are looking to like, hey, you're the leader, we're going to follow you. In terms of the big banks, a couple of years ago, we were able to organize a smaller regional community bank called Beneficial State Bank that's based in Oakland, and the owners of that bank agreed to not interfere with the workers organize a union. So it's about 110 workers at a few branches from Los Angeles up into Seattle. And that's the first time that bank workers have organized a union at a bank in, as far as we can tell, in about 40 years. There was a moment when unions were trying to organize bank workers in the 1960s, but not much since then.
So what happens next? I mean, and to the extent that I imagine, like, you don't necessarily want to give Wells Fargo management a tip that like, hey, this operation that's happening in Omaha, this bank is they're ready to vote on it. So I can appreciate you don't want to get too specific, but do you anticipate like any type of vote or an attempt to get a vote from the National Labor Relations Board by some particular branch or unit within Wells Fargo? Like, where are we at in this process? You've mentioned it's been going on for years. Are we closer to some form of culmination somewhere within Wells Fargo universe, I guess?
Great question. So I think the short answer is yes, we are working towards a culmination to have some breakthrough, some set of vote or votes somewhere where we're really approaching this as a comprehensive campaign to support workers at Wells Fargo, to have like a resilient campaign that can withstand some bumps in the road. If we get a flat tire, we'll have a pump and we can fill the tire and keep going, because we know, from all kinds of examples, how vicious employers can be once we actually get to the point of filing for an election. Right. And we've started to hear some rumblings about management having, closed doors meetings talking about, sort of the union threat, things like that. So we're being, sort of cautious and making sure that we're training workers who are organizing in their area so they know their rights. They feel emboldened and empowered, so they're not, going to be frightened at the first, kind of inquisition from their manager. And in fact, a lot of the frontline managers, like branch managers, are feeling the pinch also. So we actually get calls from the first line managers too at Wells Fargo, being supportive of the workers, or actually asking, hey, why can't managers be in the union? Which is an interesting conundrum that I've had some conversations like that. So we're focused on winning and making sure that we can again, withstand obstacles that come in our way.
Just to sort of add on to that question, and I guess this is, we can keep this as sort of theoretical or generic as, you're comfortable with doing, but are you guys sitting there and basically strategizing out that we're going to try and do that there is an advantage, and I'm, just speaking hypothetically, but there's an advantage to doing local branches around, like, sort of like vaguely based on like the Starbucks model, versus doing all the call centers or doing this type of employee across the country. Are you guys making that determination based upon what you think will ultimately create a more durable strategy and one that can build? Or is it more like we're going where the enthusiasm is and where we can get our first toehold?
It's an and, strategy, not an or. So, right, we're teaching workers how to fish, right, so that they can, and we'll see where that momentum goes. And at the same time, what we're doing is what I think is different, and some extra tools that bank workers have, is that there isn't a congressional committee that oversees coffee shops, but there is for banks, right? Because everyone needs a bank. They touch on every part of our economy and our lives. We all need a bank at some point, and so. The
federal government insures right. Their solvency essentially.
Right. And so, right. And just last week, the House and Senate banking committees had a hearing where they brought in the top 7 CEOs of the largest 7 banks, including Wells Fargo. And, for the first time, they raised worker issues. They asked them all point blank, hey, will you be neutral if your workers organize a union? it was not surprising and revealing. They all said basically no, but we were able to bring a couple Wells Fargo workers as guests of Chairwoman Maxine Waters to sit in the audience and actually engage with Charlie Scharf during a break. He was very gracious at that moment. So it's that kind of thing where we can shine a spotlight on what's going on to help back up the workers and build political support. And frankly, we think there's a role for bank workers to play in the supervision of banks. Again, if bank regulators had talked directly to Wells Fargo workers, back in 2005 and 6 and 7, that whole problem would have persisted and been able to have been swept under the rug for so many years. So that, I think, is a tool that can help change the dynamics, change the incentives that Wells Fargo and other banks potentially could have, instead of being so geared up to crushing workers trying to have a voice. We think it's actually, in this case, to the advantage of banks to respect workers' right to organize, so that we can have a safer and sounder financial system.
If I work at a bank, whether it's Wells Fargo or not, and I'm interested in, starting to organize and ultimately form a union, how would I get in touch with you for that kind of training and advice?
Fantastic. CommitteeForBetterBanks.org. We've got a website. We've got a Facebook page, Committee for Better Banks. We've got a private Facebook group. Workers have started like a Discord server and Reddit thread. So there's a lot of community discussions that bank workers involved with Committee for Better Banks have created. But just get a hold of us at Committee for Better Banks, and we'll get you plugged in.
All right. Well, we'll put that link in our podcast and YouTube description. Nick Weiner, Senior Campaign Lead for the Committee for Better Banks at the CWA. Thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it. Good luck.
Thanks for having me.